It was an incessant onslaught, shouted from every angle and voice. The center position was dead. There was no more room in the game of giants for giants themselves. Now it was about speed, finesse, and quickness. Post-ups were obsolete, face-ups were a thing of the past, and traditional towering fives were nothing more than relics. At least that's what we were told. A lot has transpired since the Olajuwon Rockets or the Shaquille O'Neal Lakers. Rule changes, generational teams, and unforeseen talents moved the game in a direction we hadn't seen before. Something about it felt intentional, a deliberate attempt from the powers that be to artificially manipulate the game and turn the low block into nothing more than an innocuous square. It almost worked too. We were a couple years away from traditional big men descending into the depths of the has-beens and once-weres. Nationally acclaimed post savants were sliding down draft boards and off of rosters. Centers were valued by their ability to catch lobs, set screens, and shoot threes. It seemed all but inevitable that the league would move on from the five entirely. But even with all the rule changes, strategic movements, and tactical shifts, you can't prevent exceptional talents from being exceptional. Now our game is slowly but gradually being repopulated with skilled artisans, controlling the flow of the game from just outside the key and within. It's a beautiful thing to see and a sight for sore eyes for many. But how did we come so close to losing such an essential part of basketball? And how did we not realize it until it was almost too late? The answer is a complicated mix of natural growth and intentional manipulation. This is the NBA's small ball lie. Let's start with a quick historic overview. It might be surprising, but tall people have historically been pretty great at basketball. When the game first got going as a serious professional league, it was largely fueled by the colossal rivalry of the NBA's two walking monuments, Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell. Their cinematic duels paved the way for the age of Kareem and the passing comment of Bill Walton. Sure, there was a bit of a lull while Larry, Magic, and Mike overtook the sport, but it wasn't long before Olajuwon and Ewing picked up the torch and handed it to the backboard-breaking tight end from Louisiana State. In each era, we had a gifted giant mystifying audiences, defying defenses, and stalling offenses. It was all part of the game we loved, an essential piece of the recipe we had all grown to hold dear. And then those winds of change went in an entirely new direction. Small ball wasn't a new idea. It had lingered on the fringes of basketball for decades, a system built on spreading the floor and making use of all 94 inches on the court, and then attacking with speed and deliberation. Don Nelson, the concept's founder and prophet, made some noises with the Milwaukee Bucks in the 80s, and then the Run TMC Warriors in the 90s, but it was always met with harsh resistance. The idea of going small in basketball seemed blatantly counterintuitive. Nelly was brandished a heretic, a madman, a dangerous renegade that might get your hopes up, but could never deliver any hardware with that gimmicky style. That's when a scrawny Canadian kid crossed the border. Steve Nash was the chosen one of the small ball system, the skeleton key that unlocked the endless potentials of the free-flowing attack. He had the quickness to morph defenders into turnstiles, the patience and composure to waltz through the key, methodically waiting for a defender to overreact, and the borderline omniscient vision to weaponize every single player on the court at any given moment. Watching that unassuming kid rewrite the record books at Santa Clara was Nelly's talking bush in the desert. This was his guy. They had to have him. The Mavericks brought Nash to Dallas, pairing him with a young, awkward sharpshooter from Germany named Dirk Nowitzki. It wasn't always pretty. Dirk struggled to adjust to the NBA, and Nash battled injuries, but the pieces began to fall into place. By the early 2000s, the Mavericks were running. Nash was an electrifying Green Day lookalike who controlled games with surgical precision, while Dirk spaced the floor and filled it up. But basketball is a business. A 5-game playoff loss to the Kings, where Nash struggled to defend Mike Bibby, was enough for Mark Cuban. At 30 years old, with defensive limitations and injury concerns, Cuban let Nash walk, and it was kind of the smart thing to do. The dream seemed over. Don Nelson, disillusioned, resigned the following season. The wax had melted, and Icarus had fallen into the sea, but the kid from the Great North wasn't done just yet. Steve Nash signing with the Suns wasn't a monumental free agency move. It was a good for him kind of deal. Phoenix was terrible, having only won 29 games the year prior, and the addition of an all-star reserve point guard wasn't supposed to do much to change that. And then the rules changed. Hand checking, which had been a moderate restriction since 1997, was now entirely banned. Perimeter defenders would have to stay in front of opposing ball handlers without putting their hands on them at all. A tough ask in most cases, but a verifiably impossible one once you're matched up against that sweet 7-footed Canadian. With the revolutionary Mike D'Antoni holding the clipboard, Nash running the show, and Amari Stoudemire running past centers and jumping over forwards, Phoenix Suns took the league by storm. For 3 years in a row, you didn't have to check the stats or look it up. Everyone knew the best offense in the league resided in the arid deserts of Phoenix. They had some abnormal ideas on how many threes you should shoot and downright blasphemous beliefs on how fast you could run. These Suns teams were absolutely flying up and down the court, a breakneck pace that was possible because they played Stoudemire at the 5 more often than not. When Stat couldn't go, they'd insert Kurt Thomas or Boris Diaw, and it was business as usual. They were small, but you can't stop what you couldn't catch. Nash redefined the high pick and roll. Stoudemire grew into an all-NBA talent, feasting off some perfectly placed dimes, and Mike D'Antoni cemented himself as an innovator. Unfortunately, playoff success can be elusive, and every year some unfortunate event, injury or suspension, kept them from playing for the title they so desperately wanted. But when the sun set in Arizona, current exec and longtime basketball legend Steve Kerr was ready to push the movement forward. Coming into Golden State, Kerr had a great situation in front of him. Steph Curry was on the precipice of greatness. Klay Thompson was a sharpshooter with some high potential, and David Lee was actually seen as a reliable player and all-star. He could have played it safe, rolled the ball out, and kept building on the foundation that Mark Jackson had laid. Instead, he switched gears. These Warriors teams weren't going to shy away from who they were. Instead, they arrogantly leaned into it, encouraging Steph and Klay to hoist threes with reckless abandon, bringing a young Draymond off the bench and using his versatility to confuse front courts everywhere, and running pick and roll after pick and roll until your big man was out 5 feet beyond the three-point line. And then another rule change. Increased freedom for players off ball, preventing defenders from using their physicality to restrict movements. Giving the kind of advantage to the baby-faced assassin and his brothers in arms was overwhelming. NBA defenses everywhere were caught off guard, sprinting around as much as they could with their heavy feet, trying desperately to slow number 30 down without fouling him, and falling for it time and time again. Before you knew it, D'Antoni was back with the Rockets, running 4-out sets to fully optimize his generational scoring talent in James Harden. Houston was firing up threes and spreading the floor like their lives depended on it, and turning opposing bigs into highlight fodder for the beard. By 2019, with KD now on the Warriors and Chris Paul on the Rockets, it was almost over. The center position was dying off rapidly. You had your screen setters, your rebounders, and lob threats, but back to the basket centers, nowhere to be found. Low post connoisseurs were a dying breed, and it looked like the future of basketball would have no room for the lumbering giants that created the game. It was a rough stretch for fans of post-centric offenses. Centers still existed, sure, but they weren't utilized. They were stuck in a corner or brought up to be a wall for a guard. They were no longer players with freedom. They were heavily programmed chess pieces told what to do and where to be. As a result, we saw big men drop on draft boards, guards get green lights across the board, and occasionally even watch teams build entire rosters without a 5-man in sight. You had to acknowledge the greatness of Nash and the absurdity of Steph after him. There was real value to this small ball play style, value that people would have scoffed at before the 7 or second left Suns got going. But this was too much. The game didn't feel the same. There wasn't as much novelty. We all love a scintillating perimeter attacker, but there's something longingly reminiscent about a good jump hook or a well-timed up and under on the low block. Thankfully, we didn't have to wait long for an answer. We said it once and we'll say it again. You can't stop exceptional talents from being exceptional. Those rule changes that made life hell for centers in the league are still in place, but a new wave of 5s has adapted. We'll start with the Serbian heartthrob himself. Jokic is a generational talent and a unique one at that. The rugged 7-foot big with the strength to wrestle a grizzly bear and the touch to make all jump hooks and finger rolls enormously high percentage shots. Sure, you could double, you could be physical, trap him on spins, whatever you want. But at the end of the day, there's not a player on your team that can prevent the pride of Denver from walking down to the low block, navigating around your interior defenders, and either calmly adding 2 points of his own on the stat sheet or finding a teammate and delivering a spoon-fed assist. His Eastern Conference counterpart is a marvel in his own right. Granted, there's been some injury issues, maybe even some effort issues, but when he's healthy, Joel Embiid is a one-of-a-kind talent, a 7'2" face-up artist with a bag deeper than most guards, a shot more consistent than most gym rats. Staying in front of him would be enough of a challenge, but that enormous frame demands that his defender be at least roughly equal in his size. And how many 7'2" centers can you find that have the feet to keep up with Embiid? Anthony Davis has grown into the potential we all knew he would from his days at Kentucky. The Brow has the length, timing, and movement skills to alter every shot that goes up, and block a handful night after night. On the other end, his background as a high school guard is evident, but so are his years refining his back-to-the-basket game. He's got the quickness to break out a jab step step you have to respect, the touch to punish you for mid-range, and the toughness to spin off of contact into a smooth fadeaway. And finally, there's Victor Wembanyama, a 7'5" Frenchman who walks straight out of a lab and onto the nearest basketball court to take the entire game by the horns. His combination of size, athleticism, and skill is not only unprecedented, it was previously thought to be impossible. Players of his size were supposed to be awkward and uncoordinated, but Wemby flies up and down the court with grace and shoots the ball better than your 2-guard. We have Alperen Sengun, mystifying defenders with an endless array of fakes and footwork. Jarrett Allen, fueling one of the league's best defenses with a throwback afro and play style. And Bam Adebayo, redefining what it means to be a polished center. They might be hard to find, but a great center opens up the floor in a litany of ways. They drag rim protectors out of the key, weaponize cutters in a novel way thanks from countless added passing lanes from the block, and they demand constant attention from the front court, hindering help defenders and weak side shot blockers in the process. Small ball has its place, it's proven as much, but all the speed in the world can't run great centers off the court. They almost pulled it off, nearly eradicated the foundational group of superstars from our beautiful game. But as long as that ball is round and the rim is orange, basketball will have a place for great centers. From Russell to Kareem, Olajuwon to Shaq, and now Jokic to Wembanyama, elite centers are basketball royalty, and a few trends won't erase their legacy or their future.